John Carpenter's 1982 masterpiece, holds secrets darker than its Antarctic setting. A director who worked himself into a hospital, comedians auditioning for dramatic roles, a Norwegian warning that spoiled the entire plot, and production accidents that nearly killed the cast. From rubber blood made with KY jelly to a dog so convincing it terrified seasoned actors, the things behind the scenes stories are as twisted as its body horror. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Thing, 1982. Fact 1. Rob Bottin hospitalized from exhaustion. When you watch The Thing's grotesque creature transformations, you're witnessing the work of a 22-year-old special effects artist who pushed himself so hard that he literally worked himself into a hospital. Rob Bottin didn't just create the movie's memorable monsters, he nearly destroyed his health in the process. Bottin was involved in every single aspect of the creature design for The Thing, from the initial sketches to the final on-set puppetry. What makes his story so remarkable is the sheer intensity of his commitment to the project. For more than a full year, Bottin worked without taking a single day off. He essentially moved into the studio, turning the workplace into his temporary home. When exhaustion hit at the end of long work days, he would sleep in the studio's locker rooms and on various film sets rather than going home. This wasn't just dedication, it was an unhealthy obsession with perfection that took a serious toll on his body. Bottin was determined to make every creature transformation as realistic and terrifying as possible, spending countless hours sculpting, painting, and testing different materials. He would work through the night, sleep for a few hours on whatever surface was available, then wake up and continue working on the intricate details that would make audiences squirm in their theater seats. The young artist's extreme work schedule finally caught up with him when his body simply couldn't handle the stress anymore. The exhaustion and lack of proper rest landed Bottin in the hospital, forcing him to take a break from the project he had poured his entire being into. During his recovery time, legendary effects artist Stan Winston stepped in to help complete some of the work, particularly the memorable dog transformation scene that opens the film's horror. Bottin's hospitalization shows just how much physical and mental energy went into creating the practical effects that still impress audiences more than 40 years later. His sacrifice paid off in the form of creature effects that remain some of the most convincing and disturbing ever put on film. Fact 2. Tobe Hooper's banana peel comedy version. Before John Carpenter created the tense, paranoid masterpiece we know today, The Thing was almost turned into a slapstick horror comedy that would have featured characters getting attacked by the alien monster after slipping on banana peels. This bizarre version was the brainchild of Tobe Hooper, the director who had previously terrified audiences with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. Hooper's approach to The Thing would have been drastically different from what eventually made it to theaters. Instead of the claustrophobic atmosphere of dread and suspicion that defines Carpenter's film, Hooper wanted to blend horror with broad physical comedy. His vision included plenty of slapstick humor throughout the movie, with the alien creature catching victims in absurdly comedic situations. The most memorable example that survived in production notes was a scene where a character would literally slip on a banana peel and become vulnerable to attack by The Thing during this moment of cartoon-like clumsiness. The tone Hooper had in mind was apparently so different from the source material that it raised serious concerns among the people financing the project. Lawrence Terman, who served as producer on the film, was particularly vocal about his doubts regarding this comedic direction. When discussing Hooper's banana peel concept years later, Terman didn't mince words about what he thought the final result would have been. He stated that if Hooper had been allowed to continue with his horror comedy vision, it would have been one of the worst movies ever made. The decision to remove Hooper from the project and bring in John Carpenter instead proved to be crucial for the film's eventual cult status. While Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre had demonstrated his ability to create effective horror, his comedic approach to the thing simply didn't match what the studio wanted, or what audiences would later embrace. The contrast between Hooper's planned banana peel gags and Carpenter's psychological terror shows just how dramatically different the film could have been. Fact 3. Norwegian dialogue spoiled the plot. The opening scene of The Thing contains one of cinema's most ironic moments, where a Norwegian helicopter pilot literally shouts out the entire plot of the movie, but almost no one in the audience understands what he's saying because he's speaking in Norwegian. For viewers who could translate his frantic warnings, the mystery was essentially solved before it even began. The scene shows two Norwegian researchers in a helicopter desperately chasing what appears to be an innocent husky across the snowy Antarctic landscape. To English-speaking audiences, the pilot's shouting sounds like urgent but incomprehensible foreign dialogue. However, when his words are translated into English, they reveal that he knows exactly what the dog really is, and he's trying to warn everyone about the terrible danger it represents. The Norwegian pilot is frantically yelling, "Get the hell away!" It's not a dog, it's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots. These words contain the core concept that the American characters won't discover until much later in the film. The pilot understands that the creature is an alien that can perfectly mimic other life forms, and he's desperately trying to prevent it from reaching the American research station, where it will have access to more potential victims. This creates a fascinating viewing experience for Norwegian speakers or anyone else who happens to understand the language. While most of the audience is watching what seems like a confusing opening with mysterious foreign characters, those who can translate the dialogue are getting a complete spoiler for the film's central premise. The pilot's warnings reveal that the dog is actually a shape-shifting alien organism, something that other characters will spend most of the movie trying to figure out. John Carpenter's decision to include this dialogue was intentional, creating different layers of understanding for different viewers. The scene works both as a mysterious opening for most audiences and as a dramatic irony moment for those who understand Norwegian, showing how the tragedy could have been prevented if only there hadn't been a language barrier. Fact 4. Jay Leno and Gary Shandling auditioned. Before David Clennon delivered his memorable performance as Palmer, the paranoid assistant mechanic in The Thing, Universal Studios seriously considered casting some of the biggest names in comedy for the role. Jay Leno, who would later become the host of The Tonight Show, and Gary Shandling, the future star of It's Gary Shandling's Show, both auditioned for a part in what would become one of horror cinema's most intense films. The studio's decision to bring in established comedians wasn't entirely surprising when you consider that Palmer does have several comedic moments throughout the film. His character provides some of the movie's lighter moments with his wisecracks and laid-back attitude, which helps balance the overwhelming tension and paranoia that builds as the story progresses. Universal executives thought that experienced comedians might be able to nail these humorous beats while also handling the dramatic requirements of the role. Along with Leno and Shandling, the studio also brought in Charles Fleischer, a comedian and voice actor who would later become famous as the voice of Roger Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. All three comedians went through the audition process, reading scenes and testing their ability to shift between Palmer's comedic personality and the more serious moments that the character experiences as the alien threat becomes more apparent. However, when it came time to make the final decision, Universal ultimately chose David Clennon, an accomplished dramatic actor with experience in both television and film. Clennon had previously appeared in movies like Being There and The Paper Chase, where he demonstrated his ability to handle complex characters with multiple emotional layers. The casting directors realized that while Palmer needed to deliver laughs, he also required someone who could convincingly portray fear, suspicion, and eventually the terror of facing an otherworldly threat. Glennon's background in dramatic acting proved to be exactly what the role needed, as Palmer becomes one of the most memorable characters in the film, balancing humor with genuine human emotion during the increasingly desperate situation at the Antarctic research station. Fact 5. Kurt Russell nearly blown up. Kurt Russell came dangerously close to serious injury during one of the thing's most explosive scenes when his character, MacReady, hurls dynamite at the transformed Palmer creature. Russell had no idea just how powerful the explosion would be, and the blast was much larger than anyone on set had anticipated, putting the lead actor at genuine risk during what should have been a controlled stunt sequence. The scene in question occurs during the film's climactic moments when Palmer reveals himself to be infected by the alien organism and transforms into a grotesque creature. MacReady responds by throwing dynamite at the monster to destroy it, but the special effects team had created an explosion that was far more intense than Russell expected. When he tossed the explosive and took cover, the resulting blast was powerful enough that it could have seriously hurt him if he had been standing just a few feet closer to the detonation point. However, Russell's close call with the dynamite explosion wasn't the only dangerous incident that occurred during the filming of this sequence. The production team had set up multiple explosive charges for the scene, and after they finished filming and called cut, everyone thought the dangerous part was over. The cast and crew were relaxing and discussing the shot they had just completed when suddenly another bomb that had failed to detonate during the scripted explosion went off unexpectedly. This surprise blast caught everyone completely off guard and sent the entire cast diving face first into the snow for safety. Since they were filming in an outdoor location with real snow on the ground, the actors found themselves buried in the cold, wet powder as they scrambled to get away from the unexpected explosion. The incident happened after all the cameras had stopped rolling, which means this genuinely frightening moment wasn't captured on film, but it certainly gave everyone on set a story they would never forget. The unexpected explosion served as a reminder of just how dangerous film productions can be, even when safety precautions are taken and professional stunt coordinators are involved in planning the action sequences. Fact 6. Cast bus nearly fell off cliff. The cast of the thing almost became victims of a real-life disaster before they even reached the film set, when their transportation bus skidded on icy mountain roads and came dangerously close to sliding off a cliff during a treacherous journey through the Canadian wilderness. This harrowing incident occurred during what was supposed to be a routine trip to the filming location in British Columbia. The production had arranged for the entire cast to travel together on a single bus for the 6-hour journey to Stewart, British Columbia, where they would be filming the exterior scenes for the Antarctic research station. The trip took them through some of the most remote and mountainous terrain in Western Canada, with winding roads that became extremely hazardous when winter weather conditions moved in during their travel day. Heavy snowfall began during the journey, creating the kind of dangerous driving conditions that locals in the area know to avoid whenever possible. The combination of fresh snow, existing ice on the roadway, and the steep mountain terrain created a perfect storm for automotive accidents. As the bus navigated the twisting mountain highway, the driver lost control of the vehicle when it hit a particularly slippery section of the road. The bus began sliding sideways toward the edge of the cliff, carrying the entire main cast of the movie toward what could have been a fatal drop into the valley below. For several terrifying moments, it seemed like the film's production might end before it had really begun, with the loss of Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, Keith David, and the rest of the actors who were aboard the vehicle. Fortunately, the bus driver was able to regain control and steer the vehicle back onto the safe part of the roadway before it went over the edge. The cast members who experienced this near miss later described it as one of the most frightening moments of the entire production, and it certainly gave them a new appreciation for the real dangers of filming in remote locations during harsh winter conditions. Fact 7. Happy ending. Shot but never used. John Carpenter secretly filmed an alternate ending for The Thing that would have completely changed the film's famously ambiguous conclusion, but he never intended to use it and kept its existence hidden from Universal Studios executives who might have forced him to include it in the final cut. This happy ending would have definitively answered the question that has sparked decades of debate among fans. The Thing ends with one of cinema's most discussed final scenes, where MacReady and Child sit in the snow sharing a bottle while the research station burns behind them. Neither character knows if the other has been infected by the alien organism, and the audience is left to wonder whether one or both of them might be the Thing in disguise. This uncertainty was exactly what Carpenter wanted to achieve, but he knew the studio might push for a more conventional Hollywood ending. To protect his artistic vision, Carpenter filmed additional footage showing MacReady being rescued and taken to McMurdo Station, the largest research facility in Antarctica. In this alternate version, it would have been clearly established that MacReady had survived the ordeal and remained human throughout the entire experience. The scene would have removed all ambiguity about his fate and confirmed that he had successfully defeated the alien threat. However, Carpenter never showed this footage to anyone at Universal Studios, knowing that executives would likely insist on using the more optimistic conclusion instead of his preferred ambiguous ending. He kept the alternate scenes completely secret during the editing process, ensuring that the studio never had the opportunity to override his creative decision about how the film should conclude. Even more intriguingly, Carpenter has claimed that he is the only person who knows the true answer to whether MacReady or Childs is infected at the end of the movie. He has stated that not even cinematographer Dean Cundy, his longtime collaborator, knows which interpretation is correct. This means that somewhere in Carpenter's mind, there exists a definitive answer to one of horror cinema's greatest mysteries. Fact 8. Peter Maloney's dog phobia problem. Peter Maloney, the actor who played meteorologist Bennings in The Thing, had a genuine fear of dogs that made filming some of the movie's early scenes extremely challenging for him, particularly when he had to interact with Jed, the Alaskan Malamute, who played the infected dog that arrives at the American research station. This real-life phobia created unexpected difficulties during what should have been straightforward scenes. In the film's opening sequence, after the Norwegian helicopter crashes and the mysterious dog seeks shelter at the American base, Bennings is one of the first characters to encounter the animal. The script called for Jed to jump on Maloney during these scenes, which would normally be a simple interaction between an actor and a well-trained animal performer. However, Maloney's fear of dogs turned these moments into genuinely stressful experiences for the actor. The production team had specifically chosen Jed for his calm temperament and professional training, making him ideal for working with actors who might not be comfortable around animals. Jed had been trained to follow commands precisely and was known for being gentle and predictable on film sets. Despite the dog's excellent behavior and the presence of professional animal handlers, Maloney still struggled with his scenes because his phobia was strong enough to override his knowledge that the animal posed no actual threat. Director John Carpenter and the animal handlers had to work patiently with Maloney to help him get through the required takes, using various techniques to make him feel more comfortable while still capturing the scenes as written. The handlers stayed close by during filming to provide reassurance, and they likely had to do multiple takes to get shots where Maloney appeared natural and relaxed, despite his internal anxiety about being so close to the dog. This behind-the-scenes challenge adds an interesting layer to Maloney's performance, since his character Bennings shows no particular fear or suspicion of the dog when it first arrives at the station, which means the actor had to overcome his personal phobia to portray a character who welcomes the animal. Fact 9. Richard Masur chose The Thing over E.T. Richard Masur, who played dog handler Clark in The Thing, made one of the most unfortunate career timing decisions in Hollywood history when he turned down a role in Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial to appear in John Carpenter's horror film instead. This choice became particularly painful when both movies were released on the exact same date in June of 1982. Masur was offered parts in both films during the same period, creating a scheduling conflict that forced him to choose between two very different alien-themed projects. At the time, both movies were just scripts and production plans, so Masur had no way of knowing which film would become a cultural phenomenon and which would struggle at the box office. He made his decision based on the material he read and his personal preference for the type of story he wanted to tell. The actor chose The Thing because he was drawn to the psychological complexity of the script and the challenging nature of the role. Clark is a crucial character who serves as the dog handler at the Antarctic research station, and his interactions with the infected husky help drive the early plot developments. Masur was attracted to the intense, claustrophobic atmosphere of the story and the opportunity to work with John Carpenter, who had already established himself as a master of suspense and horror filmmaking. When June 25, 1982 arrived, the contrast between the two films' reception couldn't have been more dramatic. E.T. became an immediate blockbuster success, earning critical acclaim and breaking box office records to become the highest-grossing film of all time at that point. Meanwhile, The Thing received mostly negative reviews from critics and performed poorly financially, earning less than $20 million against its $15 million budget. The irony of the situation was made even more awkward by the fact that audiences were choosing between a heartwarming story about a friendly alien who just wanted to go home and a terrifying tale about a hostile alien that wanted to replace all human life on Earth. Fact 10. Morricone composed music without seeing footage. Ennio Morricone, the legendary composer behind classics like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, created music for The Thing in one of the most unusual ways possible. He composed and recorded 20 minutes of original score without ever watching a single frame of the movie he was scoring. This unconventional approach led to an equally unconventional collaboration between Morricone and director John Carpenter. The arrangement came about because Morricone was extremely busy with other projects and couldn't dedicate the usual amount of time that film scoring typically requires. Instead of the normal process where composers watch rough cuts of scenes and then write music specifically tailored to match the action and emotions on screen, Morricone agreed to create a collection of musical pieces that Carpenter could use however he saw fit throughout the film. Morricone recorded these 20 minutes of music as standalone compositions, creating different moods and atmospheres that he thought might work for a horror film set in Antarctica. He gave Carpenter complete freedom to edit, arrange, and place these musical pieces wherever they seemed appropriate during the post-production process. This meant that Carpenter essentially became his own music editor, cutting and pasting Morricone's compositions to fit the specific scenes and moments in the film. However, when Carpenter began working with Morricone's music during editing, he discovered that some of the pieces didn't quite match the tone he wanted for certain scenes, particularly the more intense tension-building moments. Rather than ask Morricone to compose additional music or revise the existing pieces, Carpenter decided to secretly record his own electronic music to fill in the gaps where Morricone's orchestral compositions weren't working effectively. Carpenter created these additional pieces using synthesizers and electronic instruments, which gave them a completely different sound from Morricone's traditional orchestral approach. The final film ended up featuring a unique combination of Morricone's sweeping orchestral music and Carpenter's electronic compositions, creating a soundtrack that neither composer could have created entirely on their own. Fact 11. Interior sets kept at 40 degrees. The cast and crew of The Thing endured genuinely freezing conditions during filming, as the interior sets were deliberately kept at a bone-chilling 40 degrees Fahrenheit to create the authentic breath vapor that would sell the illusion of characters surviving in an Antarctic research station. This decision meant that everyone working on the sound stages was essentially filming in refrigerator-like conditions for weeks on end. John Carpenter and his production team wanted to avoid using artificial breath effects or digital additions that might look fake on camera, so they chose to create real cold conditions that would naturally produce the visible breath that audiences would expect to see in such an environment. This attention to detail required significant commitment from everyone involved in the production, since cast and crew members had to work normal film schedules while dealing with temperatures that most people would consider uncomfortably cold. The decision to maintain these frigid conditions affected every aspect of the filming process, from the actors' performances to the technical crew's ability to operate cameras and lighting equipment effectively. The actors had to deliver their lines and perform their scenes while dealing with the physical discomfort of being genuinely cold, which actually helped them portray characters who were supposed to be struggling with harsh Antarctic conditions. For the crew members operating cameras, sound equipment, and lighting systems, the cold temperatures created additional technical challenges, since electronic equipment can behave differently in extreme cold, and crew members had to wear gloves and heavy clothing that made their jobs more difficult. The lighting department had to account for how the cold air would affect the appearance of their setups, and the camera operators had to ensure that condensation and temperature changes wouldn't damage their expensive equipment. The production could have chosen to film in normally heated sets and add breath effects during post-production. But Carpenter believed that the authentic cold conditions would improve the performances and create a more believable atmosphere. The actors' genuine reactions to the cold helped them embody characters who were truly experiencing the harsh conditions described in the script. Fact 12. Multiple deleted death scenes filmed. Several members of the research team in The Thing were originally given much more graphic and detailed death scenes that were either filmed and then deleted or planned, but never shot due to script changes during production. These alternative death sequences would have shown the fates of Fuchs, Bennings, and Windows in dramatically different ways than what audiences see in the final version of the film. Fuchs, the biologist played by Joel Paulus, is discovered as burned remains in the snow in the theatrical release, but a deleted scene showed him meeting a much more violent end inside the research station. In this alternate version, Fuchs would have been found by Childs and Palmer impaled on the inside of the door to the station's greenhouse. This scene was actually filmed, but was ultimately cut from the movie, and photographs from the shoot still exist showing the gruesome setup. Bennings, portrayed by Peter Maloney, was given an entirely different death sequence in another deleted scene that showed him being stabbed in the back with a screwdriver by an unidentified person wearing a blue coat. This attack would have taken place inside the dog kennels, adding another layer of mystery about which team member was responsible for the killing. The scene was filmed but removed during the editing process, possibly because it created confusion about the timeline of infections. Windows, played by Thomas Waits, was originally scripted to have one of the most dramatic death scenes in the entire film. Instead of simply disappearing as he does in the final cut, Windows was supposed to be dragged away by the alien creature and, realizing his fate, swallow a cyanide capsule to prevent himself from being assimilated by the Thing. This scene would have shown a character choosing death over becoming part of the alien organism. Additionally, storyboards revealed that Bennings was also considered for a death scene, where he would be dragged beneath the ice by an escaped dog thing. The Knowles was planned to die in much more graphic circumstances at the hands of a creature called the Box Thing. Fact 13. Missing eye light. Revealed Palmer's identity. Cinematographer Dean Cundey used a subtle lighting technique during the famous blood test scene to give observant viewers a visual clue about Palmer's true identity, moments before his dramatic transformation was revealed to the other characters. By deliberately excluding Palmer from the eye-light setup that illuminated all the other characters, Cundey created a visual hint that something was different about him. The blood test sequence is one of the most memorable and tense moments in The Thing, where MacReady uses heated wire to test samples of each team member's blood to see which will react violently to the heat, revealing who has been infected by the alien organism. During this scene, the characters are arranged in a circle, and the lighting setup includes small lights positioned to create gleams and reflections in each person's eyes as they watch the terrifying procedure unfold. Cundey made the deliberate choice to position the eye lights so that every character except Palmer would have these distinctive gleams visible in their eyes during the close-up shots. This created a subtle visual difference that made Palmer stand out from the group, even though most viewers wouldn't consciously notice this detail during their first viewing of the film. The missing eye light gave Palmer's eyes a slightly different appearance that suggested something was not quite right about him. This lighting technique served as foreshadowing for Palmer's reveal as an infected team member, which happens just moments later when his blood sample reacts violently to the heated wire, and he begins his horrifying transformation into a grotesque alien creature. The eye light detail was Cundey's way of providing a visual clue for viewers who might pick up on subtle differences, while still maintaining the surprise for those who didn't notice the lighting variation. The technique demonstrates the level of thought and planning that went into every aspect of the film's visual storytelling, where even small lighting details were used to enhance the narrative and provide additional layers of meaning for viewers who paid close attention to the cinematography. Fact 14. Dean Cundey's eye glint theory debunked. One of the most widely shared theories about The Thing has been completely misunderstood by fans for decades, leading to a false belief that cinematographer Dean Cundey revealed a secret method for identifying infected characters throughout the entire film by looking for missing eye glints. This theory has been so persistent that it eventually reached director John Carpenter himself, who bluntly dismissed it as nonsense. The misunderstanding began when Cundey discussed his lighting techniques during a DVD commentary track, where he explained how he used eye lights in one specific scene to create a visual hint about Palmer's infected status during the blood test sequence. However, fans and film enthusiasts took this single example and expanded it into a comprehensive theory that claimed all infected characters could be identified by the absence of eye glints throughout the movie. This expanded theory suggested that viewers could solve the film's mysteries by carefully examining every character's eyes in every scene, looking for the presence or absence of these reflective glints to determine who was human and who had been taken over by the alien organism. The idea became so popular that it spread across internet forums, film analysis websites, and social media discussions about the movie's hidden meanings and clues. The theory gained so much traction that people began applying it to the film's famous ending, claiming they could definitively determine whether MacReady or Childs was infected by analyzing the lighting in their eyes during the final scene. Fans spent countless hours freeze-framing moments throughout the film, convinced they were uncovering a secret code that Cundey had deliberately embedded in the cinematography. When Carpenter heard about this widespread interpretation of Cundey's comments, he responded with characteristic directness, stating that the expanded eye glint theory was completely wrong. Carpenter made it clear that Cundey's technique was used only in that one Palmer scene and was never intended as a movie-wide system for identifying infected characters. The director's dismissal of the theory shows how fan speculation can sometimes take on a life of its own, creating elaborate explanations for details that were much simpler than people imagined. Fact 15. Donald Pleasant's too recognizable. for Blair. John Carpenter originally wanted to cast Donald Pleasence as Dr. Blair, the station's physician, who becomes increasingly paranoid about the alien threat, but ultimately decided that the British actor was simply too famous and recognizable to work effectively in a role that required the audience to remain uncertain about the character's infection status throughout most of the film. Pleasence had already established a successful working relationship with Carpenter, having delivered a memorable performance as the psychiatrist Dr. Loomis in Carpenter's 1978 horror classic Halloween. The actor's intense screen presence and ability to convey both authority and underlying menace made him an appealing choice for the Blair character, who starts as a rational scientist but gradually becomes more erratic and suspicious as the story progresses. However, Carpenter realized that casting such a well-known actor in the Blair role would create problems for the film's central mystery about which characters had been infected by the alien organism. The Blair character is designed to become infected relatively early in the story, but the script intentionally keeps this transformation hidden from the audience until much later in the film. The character's increasingly strange behavior is meant to seem like it could be either genuine human paranoia or evidence of alien infection. Carpenter understood that audiences would immediately recognize Pleasence and would likely pay closer attention to his character because of the actor's established reputation and screen presence. This additional scrutiny would make it much more difficult to maintain the ambiguity about Blair's status that was essential to the story's effectiveness. When a famous actor is on screen, viewers naturally focus more attention on their performance and behavior, which would have undermined the uncertainty that Carpenter wanted to create. By choosing the less recognizable Wilford Brimley instead, Carpenter ensured that Blair could blend in more effectively with the ensemble cast, allowing the character's gradual transformation to remain mysterious for a longer period. Brimley's casting allowed audiences to view Blair as just another member of the research team rather than a marquee star whose character arc they might try to predict.